one day a patient came in for liposuction consultation. I went in the room, examined her, and yeah, you're a good candidate for lipo. And then she said, well, can't you just take that fat and put it in my butt? And I'm saying, well, actually, yeah, you can. That's called a Brazilian butt lift. I've never done it before, but I've read about it. I've spent time with one of the originators of the procedure, and I've done a lot of liposuction, so I feel comfortable doing it. If you feel comfortable with me doing it for the first time, then I'm happy to do it. And for some reason, she's like, yeah, let's go. Hi, it's Dr. William. I want to share with you my OG story, which is really also a story of how I developed and matured as a plastic surgeon, from a young plastic surgeon starting out to where I am today. It all starts back in the mid-2000s. I was finishing my plastic surgery residency at Duke, and I went to a meeting in Chicago. And it was the first time I got to see Dr. Mendieta speak, and he was talking about performing a BBL. And I really wasn't familiar with what a BBL was. With Duke, we never performed any Brazilian butt lifts, and I didn't know of any surgeon in the area performing them. So it was totally new to me. But when I saw his lecture, and I saw his results, and I saw what he did, I was captivated. I thought, this is so smart. We're removing fat from one area, but then we're adding it back in. And usually with lipo, it's just subtraction. And with the BBL, it was a subtraction and addition. And so I approached Dr. Mendieta after his lecture, and I said, I'm just finishing up. I've never done a BBL. I've never been trained on a BBL. I really don't know much about it, but I really liked your lecture. I like your work, and I'd love this concept. Can I come to Miami and visit you? And he said, yeah, sure. He's extremely gracious, very nice. Went down and spent a week with him in his office in Miami. And I learned what a BBL was. I then returned back to North Carolina, and I did a lot of liposuction, but I didn't do any BBLs for the first couple of years. And again, no one was really doing them where I was, or where there wasn't a thing. I was starting to do the liposuction, and my patients were happy, and I was kind of going around and thinking like, oh, I'm good, I'm doing lipo, aren't I great? And then a patient came in for consultation for liposuction, and she said to me, I've heard that you can take the fat that you remove from lipo and put it in your butt. And I'm saying, well, actually, yeah, you can. That's called a Brazilian butt lift. And she said, well, can you do that? In full disclosure, I've never done one, but I feel comfortable that I could do one. I had visited Dr. Mendieta in Miami. I spent a week with him. He taught me his technique. I'd been reading about it and studying about it. I'd have done a lot of lipo. And if you're okay, be my first patient. And lo and behold, she's like, yeah, sure. And so I did my first BBL, and I was happy, she was happy, and I was really, again, very charged up about this subtraction and addition, and it was great. And so another patient came in, I did another BBL, I was very happy. Another patient came in, and then that's when I had a problem. And it's really upsetting when a patient returns and they're not happy with the result, and you really look carefully to see, well, is there something I could have done better? And so I've looked at her photos many, many times and tried to figure out, what could I have done better to give her a better shape? Well, she looks a little square, and I think I could have lipoed a little bit more in this area. And that, I didn't realize it at the time, but that's what's become to me now as the key area. And I realized if I can lipo a little bit more there, I can round the butt. And so the next patient, I focused a little bit more on the key area. And I began to like my results better when I started to lipo through this. The shapes that we're starting to do, this reminds me of Dr. Littler's work on the OG line that he did, but he did it in the face. And I read that paper earlier when I was at Duke. Now he was talking about a line here in the face that was the OG, but I was starting to see it without totally realizing it yet, that's what looked good. That's why I liked these results better. It's because I was starting to develop the OG line. Well, if I'm gonna focus on this line, the line is getting flat in the hip area. So I started to build out the hip. And just like everything in life, when you don't, things take years to build up, and you have thoughts and you think about them sometime, they leave, they come back. And then I was really struck, not by what a surgeon said to me, not by what a colleague said to me, but what a landscape architect had told me. When I had taken a course, I loved gardening, and I was putting a shade garden in my house in Detroit, and I went up and I spoke to this landscape architect and said, hey, I'm planning on putting a shade garden in the back, and here are my kind of little drawing that I made. What do you think of it? And he's like, well, that's terrible. And I was like, wow, I think this is gonna look good. What, why would you say that? And he goes, because you've just drawn a straight line across the front of your bed. And there are no straight lines in nature. And that really stuck with me. Now, almost 20 years later, when I do a BBL, that's all I'm looking at is the OG line. And I become a little crazy, obsessed with this line, but I trust in the line so much because I just follow it, and it always leads me to the place I want to go so that I can get a really nice, natural, pretty shape. I started OG Recovery in order to help patients recover from plastic surgery. So I realized there was a gap there. So OG has completely changed my personal development as a surgeon throughout the last almost 20 years. So that's my OG story. That's why I like it. That's why it means so much to me personally. And that's why I continue to do it to this day, even though I first started thinking about that rudimentary back in like 2007. Okay, Cruz, thank you so much for the comment. The comment is, how do you get rid of dog ears? Well, first of all, let's look, how do you get dog ears? So here's my dog. He has an ear with shorter here and longer here. That's a dog's ear. So what does that really relate to? Well, that relates to when we're doing a tummy tuck, our abdominal incision. When we're closing this, we're closing incisions of two different lengths. If we had two incisions exactly the same length and we were just going to bring these together, then you would not get a dog ear. But when we have incisions of two different lengths, we have to do what we call cheat. We've got to bring this end over here. And this is the problem, and that's where you end up with the dog ear. And a dog ear is a little redundancy here, but it's going to be easier if I can actually show you in the operating room. So come with me and I'll take a look in the operating room. Okay, so here's what I mean. So I'm closing this incision here of a tummy tuck, and what you'll see is, I'm almost done, but I left a little bit here to show you. So once I get this closed, she's not going to have a dog ear here because I've cheated the tissue along. That's why it's all kind of bumpy through here, is we're cheating that tissue so that when we get to the corner, it's going to be nicely closed. Now you can get a little idea that there's a dog ear here. That's what dog ears look like. But also she's had lipo here. So once this kind of collapses down after lipo, I don't anticipate she's going to have a dog ear. But for patients that have like a big discrepancy between the lengths of the two incisions, sometimes I then have to extend this further to get rid of the dog ear. So I don't get that many dog ears after surgery because I will extend it to get rid of it. But even still, in some patients, we will leave the OR and there'll be a little dog ear here that we know, okay, there's a dog ear there, but if we give it time, it'll shrink and it most likely will go away and we won't have to worry about it later. If we do, then we can correct it at the time, at that time. But if we correct it at that time, the incision's going to be shorter because the tissue's had time to shrink. Whereas if we were to try to correct it at this time, the incision would be much longer to kind of chase that dog ear out. So I don't think she's going to have one here. This is coming together nicely. And once the lipo, all this tissue sort of shrinks, she's not going to have a dog ear, because she didn't have as much discrepancy between the lengths of those two incisions. But there's always a potential for dog ears, not just with tummy tucks, really with a lot of different surgeries. So thank you for your question. I'm going to get back to work. You get back to the video.